class. And today it is Rabbi Elliot Goldberg.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you. Happy Thursday, in whatever time zone you're in. I see, I love the shout out from Neil Feder from Saudi Arabia that we see. I love every shout out from all the places you're at, but I love that, we span the globe in these sessions. All right, let's hop to it. We are knee deep, maybe even a little deeper into Masechet Sanhedrin, which for me has been a lot of fun. I'm enjoying this Masechet a lot. This week we've been focused predominantly on procedures and protocols for court cases where there are 3 judges, which are financial cases. And what we're going to focus on today is a section about who qualifies to sit as a judge or to testify at one of these cases. Or more specifically, from the way the rabbis frame it, who doesn't qualify, right? Who's prevented from sitting into one of these roles. I'll show the text in a second, and I'm going to give you the link right now so people want to open it. I'm going to share my screen, but if you want to open it yourself, I just put the link in the chat. What we're going to look at today is 2 of the people on the list that the rabbis say can't serve as judges or witnesses in these financial cases. And we're going to talk a little bit about why the rabbis say this and explore some of the material that's there. But what these 2 cases have in common, for me anyways, and maybe for you from your initial read, or maybe from you after we talk about it today, is that in both of these cases, I find myself at one reading through and following the Gemara and saying, okay, in the rabbinic logic, this makes sense. These are people who fit into the category, shouldn't qualify to serve these roles in cases. And then I sort of did like a double take and said, well, wait a minute, like that doesn't seem totally fair. So for each of these cases, like I guess I have some critique of the rabbis and of the Talmud, and we're going to explore that a little bit. Like, are the rabbis acting in a way that's fair here? What does that mean, and what does that mean for us? And you'll see what I mean as we hop into it. All right, I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to get started. Here we go. All right, I see some of your emojis here or avatars in the screen. So this is the Mishnah that frames this, which I referenced before. These are the ones who are disqualified from bearing witness. The Mishnah lists a number of them. One who plays with dice, one who lends money with interest, those who fly pigeons, and merchants who trade in the produce of the sabbatical year. In the email Daf Yomi, right, the blog we write, a number of these were explored over the past week. One who plays with dice, it appears has to do with gambling. Lending money with interest, we've dealt with before in the Gemara, right? Earlier in the Bavas, lending with interest is not allowed. Those who fly pigeons, there are a number of interesting interpretations of that. It might be about racing pigeons, which is gambling similar to dice. It might be, this part I love, is people who train their pigeons to fly to other people's yards and convince those pigeons to fly back with them. Somehow you have, I don't know, pigeon spies who are, it's like social networker pigeons who go attract other pigeons and say, come live on my property. And somehow these pigeons convince other pigeons to come. Anyway, that's its own thing. And merchants who trade produce in the sabbatical year, right? In the sabbatical year, you can eat what grows from the land, but you're not supposed to cultivate or use that produce for commerce. So each of these people act in some ways that shows that they don't have respect for the finances or the financial laws. And it makes them suspect of being judges or witnesses in financial cases, since they show that they sort of don't buy in totally to the rules of the financial system. As was noted in the in the emails this week. Right, there are far more serious crimes you could be dismissed as a witness. You could be considered dismissed as a witness from, and the rabbis, based on some verses in the Torah, say like, right, if you've been convicted of more serious crimes, by the Torah, you're automatically disqualified from being a judge or a witness. These are more minor cases, but that's not meant to be. This is the absolute list. There's a sense that, right, certain people have been convicted of certain crimes, aren't allowed to do this. And the rabbis say not only them, but these people also can't serve in these roles. And on 25b this week, we read the sages, the rabbis add to the list shepherds, tax collectors, and customs officials. So in addition to what was in the list in the Mishnah, we have a couple of Braitot, this is one of them, that adds to the list of who are the people that can't serve right in these court cases, in these official roles. So today I want to look at shepherds and tax collectors. And we're going to do that one at a time and explore a little bit about what the rabbis say, some of the challenges that came up for me as a result. So let's start with shepherds. Here's what the rabbis in the Gemara say about that, right? Shepherds were not disqualified at first, as the sages initially assumed it was merely incidental that they would let their animals graze in the field of others. But when they realized that they, the shepherds, would intentionally send animals to the fields of others from the outset, the shepherd issued a decree that they're disqualified from bearing witness. So let's take that all in. Ultimately, why are shepherds disqualified? Shepherds, say the rabbis, have a practice, right? The norm for shepherds as they go out grazing their flocks is to have them graze on their own lands, on public lands, and on the lands of others. And taking your flock to the land of somebody else and having them graze there, right, it's trespassing, it's theft, right? Your sheep are your goats, whichever animal you have, right? Are eating from the land of others, right? It's theft, and that makes shepherds suspect. And if they're suspect from following the rules of ownership and property, we can't have them participate in an official role in trials involving finances, because by grazing their animals on land that's not theirs, they prove that they don't buy into the system that we have, and if they're not part of the system, they can't be part of the trial. So that makes sense, and it's in line with what the rabbis have said, and some their analysis of the cases in the Mishnah. But it made me wonder after my first read, after thinking about it for a while, like what the rabbis are doing here. They did in the other places too, but they're saying, here's a category of employment. Here's a category of people. People with this job are by definition not trustworthy. And it feels to me, at least in our modern context, like that we've worked hard as a society not to do that. Let's not place a stigma on, I don't know, cab drivers or dental assistants or, clerks in stores or whatever category. We don't just say everybody in this profession is somehow tainted. I mean, there are comedians sometimes, earn their living making jokes about lawyers, and right. So we have some of that in our culture, right? That there's a way that it seems to be inbounds to make jokes about, lawyers, but I don't know that lawyers love those jokes. I know as a rabbi, like not all of the genre of rabbi jokes show rabbis favorably, so I don't love all those jokes. And joking aside, here what the rabbis in the Gemara are doing they're not making a joke. They're saying shepherds are not trustworthy, and therefore they can't serve as a judge, and we won't even accept their testimony. Like if you have a shepherd who can testify in a financial case to prove that you are owed money or you are innocent of a charge that's against you, you cannot use a shepherd categorically as one of your witnesses. That strikes me as unfair. We're judging the individual shepherds based on some assumption about all shepherds, based on our impressions of like how shepherds act. And it might have even been true for many shepherds or most shepherds or almost all shepherds that they trust this, but the litmus test is not, are you an ethical shepherd or an unethical shepherd? The litmus test is, are you a shepherd? And if you are a shepherd, you're out. That seems to me a little right. We're lumping in some innocent people, some people who could be witnesses, with those who can't. So before, just want to point out with this that the rabbis don't always categorically dismiss all shepherds. And I want to just give a shout out back to the first month of Daf Yomi, actually. Brachot, page 40. Remember, sorry, I went too many pages there. Remember Brachot, page 40? Oh my God, that was like day 40, right? 5 years ago, something. This was like, feels like a lifetime ago. But one of my favorite shepherds in the Talmud, the rabbis look at and actually think nicely about. So I just wanted to bring a countertext. Benjamin the shepherd, my favorite shepherd in the Talmud, maybe the rabbi's favorite shepherd in the Talmud. They say he used to double the bread, meaning sort of fold it over. He used to wrap it. Think about like, I don't know, if you fold a tortilla in half, it makes like a pocket, like a pita. So think about maybe a pita or a folded tortilla or something. He used to double his bread before he ate. He made some kind of sandwich when he was out in the field, and he would say, "Brich mari dahaipata." Bless the Lord of this bread. And Rav said about him, hey, he fulfilled all the obligations with this to say the proper blessing for bread. Remember back in Brachot, we were talking about blessings for food. And the rabbis were talking about, do you have to use the official rabbinic language or can you use any language? And Benjamin said, Brich Mari da Haipata, in Aramaic, not Hebrew, not the formula for a bracha. And Rav says, this is a good blessing. But then the Gemara says, wait, Rav wouldn't say that because a blessing, a benediction needs to have God's name in it. And this one doesn't formally. Mare doesn't count, where here it says the Lord of this bread isn't specifically the name of God. So they edit what Benjamin said, Brich Rachmana Mare Dahaipata. Blessed be the all merciful, the Lord of this bread. And that must have been what it is. So here's a time where the rabbis look at this particular shepherd and the story about him and his desire in the field to recognize God before he ate. And even though he didn't have the tools or the knowledge or the language that was the official rabbinic practice, he is a model of spirituality, and his blessing that he used becomes is deemed okay to use as a spiritual, to use right in his ritual life, or maybe even in ours. If you teach this text in an educational setting where you also say blessings, kids will immediately start to petition to use the 5-word birkat hamazon, right? The 5-word blessing, whether before or after the meal. Brich rachmana mari daipata, shorter than all the other brachot we have. That's sort of an aside, a fun tidbit from my life as an educator. Anyways, so the point here is though, here's a place I think in this story. While there's an acknowledgement that Benjamin the shepherd doesn't have the knowledge that all the rabbis have. He does have the spirituality that they has, and his way of giving thanks to God for the food he's supposed to eat counts. So it's a place where there's respect for the shepherd, and so I don't want to blame the rabbis categorically for like I mean, I don't want to blame the rabbis for universal categorical in all cases dismissiveness towards shepherds. But I do think, going back to the text and the rationale today, it struck me that certainly today this wouldn't fly. We don't lump everyone in a single profession together and remove them from their ability to participate in the public sphere because of their profession. And made me think think again about some of these categories and raise some questions I have about how the rabbis approach this notion of who's qualified to be part of the judicial process and who's not. So that's shepherds, a little bit about shepherds, and a shout out to Benjamin and Daf Yomi from 5 years ago. Want to move on to a similar piece and go on to tax collectors. Here, I'm going to stay on the shepherd page. Let me introduce this before we read ahead. Tax collect right in the rabbinic era, right? The taxing agency was in the land of Israel, the Roman Empire, a variety of different empires in Babylonia where the rabbis there lived. But right, the government that taxed the people was an outside power taxing the local population. Wasn't the same, system exactly that we have today. But tax collectors were often people who were from the local community who collected the taxes, gave it to the tax collector from the ruling power. It made it so that the outsider didn't have to go door to door to knock to collect the money. That was, someone who knew the people who lived in the town would do that collecting, and they would pass it up, and made the right Uber tax collector, right, the manager's job easier because they didn't have to do it. And because they were an outsider or a foreigner, or perhaps because those taxes went to Rome and not to the local community, um, people didn't think fondly of tax collectors. And in the stories in the Talmud, the tax collectors have sort of they're seen for being inconsistent, right? It's not clear who they're taxing, how they're taxing, how much. And these tax collectors are also seen as sometimes not only inconsistent, but maybe being partially corrupt, that they take more than they're supposed to, or maybe they skim off the top. And that's why they're not trustworthy to testify in court cases. And we have the following story that comes up in this conversation about a particular tax collector and how he operated. And hang on, I just have to move one of the Zoom windows, which is right now sitting on my screen on top of these words. Okay. The father of Rabbi Zera collected taxes for 13 years. So Rabbi Zera, a member of the rabbinic community, his father was a tax collector. And here's what he would do. When he heard that the tax collector of the river region, right, the regional tax collector, his boss, would be coming to the city, he would say to them, "Come, my people." He would say to them, and here it means the rabbis, "Come, my people, enter into your chambers and shut the doors behind you. Hide yourself for a little moment until the indignation has passed." He would go to the rabbis, Rabbi Zera's father, and he would quote Isaiah with this verse that's here. And that was a code. The local tax collectors walking down the street reciting Isaiah, people might say. He's talking to himself. Maybe he's a little out of his mind. But actually, they listened to what he said, and they heard this verse, and this was the rabbinic code. The tax collector says this verse. It means the Uber, the manager tax collector. The regional director is coming. Follow the verse. Hide yourself behind the closed doors. And so when the tax collector comes, you are nowhere to be seen. To the ordinary people, says this story, he couldn't recite the verse. Maybe they didn't know Isaiah. And he said, "Beware, as the head tax collector of the river region is coming to the city and will now slaughter the father before the son and the son before the father." That's a little cryptic, but it seems to be code for, hey, the tax collector's coming and he's going to collect a lot of taxes. So it's a different way of saying the tax collector's hiding, go hide yourself. So Rabbi Zera's father, while his job was the tax collector, I guess from the tax authorities' perspective, he wasn't necessarily so good at it. From the people's perspective, he was saving them from it because he warned them, the tax collector's coming, go and hide. And while you're hiding, you'll see. Well, we'll see what happens. Click to the next screen. Everyone would hide, and when the tax collector would arrive, Rabbi Zera's father would say to him, "From whom shall I request taxes?" So the regional tax collector comes. The people are all hidden. Rabbi Zera said, right, the regional person wants to collect the taxes from Rabbi Zera's father. Rabbi Zera's father says, I didn't meet my quota. I don't have all the taxes, but you tell me where I'm supposed to get the taxes from. Check it out. I live in a ghost town. There's no one here. Who am I supposed to get the taxes from? That's part number one of the story. A second tale that comes about Rabbi Zera's father right after this is when he was dying, when Rabbi Zera's father was dying, he gave the following instructions: take 13 ma'ad that are tied up in my sheets and return them to so-and-so. Right? He had a bundle of money in his bed, tied up into the sheets, right? And I guess you couldn't shove it in your mattresses, tied it in sheets. And give it back to so-and-so, right? I have 13 ma'ah. That's a denomination of currency, and give it back, right? I took these from him, but I did not need them to pay the tax. So a second example of him saying on his deathbed, he says, I have some tax money I collected that I didn't need to give to the regional tax collector. yeah, and I'm on my deathbed now. After I die, please make sure this money gets back to the person who I took it from. Um, and it seems that this story comes in the Talmud to say that not all tax collectors are bad. Rabbi Zera's father actually is good. What two reasons? The second reason, he's honest. When he overtaxed somebody, he sent a refund check, right? And the person didn't even, there's no filing of taxes, but he collected tax. There were extra taxes. He returned those taxes when they were surplus, when he didn't need them. So he showed a certain ethical responsibility. And um, in the first story, what did he do? He protected the people from the taxes of the ruling empire, right? The regional tax collectors coming, he helped protect the community from being taxed from this outside power. And for both these reasons, Rabbi Zera's father is seen here in positive light, and maybe suggesting that not all tax collectors are bad, and maybe some of them we could let stand as judges or stand in court, testify in court as witnesses. So the second story here didn't raise any questions for me, but the first one did. And here's why. The first one suggests um, is suggesting that what Rabbi Zera did was okay. And while in the rabbinic context of living under the Roman Empire, we know from lots of stories we've seen in the Talmud, there was tension at times between the Roman Empire and the Jews. And we know from our study of history, there's tension sometimes between the Roman Empire and the different populations they ruled throughout the empire. And so it might be in the rabbinic context, right? Hiding so you don't have to pay tax to the empire. That might feel like ethical behavior or justifiable behavior, right? If the empire doesn't really have the right to rule and they tax unfairly, we should try to avoid those taxes. What disturbs me here about this story is the way in which some people read this text and others like it in the Talmud and use it as justification to separate themselves from the government under which they live. So one note before I say what I mean by that. This is a pluralistic space. We have lots of people live lots of different lives from lots of different corners of the Jewish community, and also people who are not Jewish themselves, but are entering the Jewish community through this study. And it's a non-judgmental space in this way. So this is potentially a not judgmental comment about a corner of the Jewish community. I guess I mean it as a critique, but not to offend any individual on this in the Zoom today. But I'm going to jump into that risky space because there are it's few and far between, and it's on certain peripheries. But there are corners of the Jewish community that take the Talmud really seriously, but use texts like this as justification to not embrace the government under which they live. Right? We know that living in the land of Israel, communities that have been there for a long time, we have Jewish communities in the land of Israel who are anti-Zionist, meaning they live in Israel because they believe they should live in the state of Israel, but they don't recognize the state of Israel as a legitimate government. They see it as a secular power, or not, right? Because in their mindset, right, the Jews will return to Israel only when the Messiah comes, or in that age, or some version of that belief system. And as a result, they live in the land of Israel because they want to live there because Jews are supposed to live there. They don't recognize the government, so they don't pay taxes. And they justify it in part by stories like this, saying, when you can avoid paying taxes to the government, you could do that as well. And then even here where I live in the United States, every once in a while, there's a story about a far right Jewish school that takes money from the government for students that aren't enrolled in the school. Meaning, right, the government has a program to provide free lunches or meals or other aid to underprivileged students. And there have been cases where some Jewish yeshivas have abused that power to fabricate students, and they list more students that they have. they don't see it as stealing, but they see it as, you know, uh, the fact that the government isn't a legitimate authority that they live under, and as a result of that, it's okay to not be ethical in their dealings with the government, both in terms of money that you're supposed to send to them or money that you can take from them. And sometimes it's texts like these that inspire those folks to think that it's ethical behavior. So what we see here today are two examples of categories that the rabbis have of people that it fits into their list. Some people can't be judges, some people can't be witnesses. There are ways in which, in the rabbinic explaining of how they got to this, the rabbinic logic makes sense. We know that court systems have rules. There are always people who are eligible to serve and people who are not. These examples today raise some questions to me. I have more sympathy for saying gamblers who show, gamblers who are professional gamblers sort of are wheeling and dealing with money unethically. Maybe they can't be, it's easier to say categorically people who are professional gamblers might not be able to be trusted witnesses. I question whether we can do that with shepherds as a category as well. And then this notion of modeling how we're supposed to engage the civil authority in whose country we live. Well, in the rabbis' era, where that civil authority was the Roman Empire, the rabbinic story about Rabbi Zera's dad might make sense and feel ethical. The way at which it can be applied today, when it is applied today, challenges me. But I have the luxury of living, in a country where the government serves the common good. At least I believe it does, and the taxes we provide to it help support that. I just know that sometimes these stories in the Talmud are read in ways to support other behaviors instead. So those are some of so these things both stood out to me, both in terms of how the rabbis read them and how we might read them, and how our situations are some ways similar in some ways different. And what came to mind, I thought about what we were reading this week. And we're down to that. I see I missed 36 comments in the chat and used most of I know it's 10 and people might have to go. I'm happy to field a question or two if we think there's time, but I'll leave that up to our host, Rachel.
I don't think there are urgent questions actually in the chat, though interesting conversation inspired by what you're saying. Let's do it this way. If someone has a question they want to ask, can you put your hand up? If you think there's when we'll use the last minute of class to do that. Earlier in the chat, oh, here we go. Okay. Laura.
A couple of us asked how this avoiding the tax collector fits with what we learned is that the law of the land is the law that we follow.
Thank you, Laura.
That's a great Talmud question, right? The rabbis have a principle, dina de malchuta dina. The law of the land is the law. And over time, that really it's mentioned in the Talmud, and over time, it became the norm Jewishly that Jews living in countries where they did not have independent self-rule for civil matters, right, lived according to the law of the land. So like I'm bound by Jewish law to follow the speed limit, pay my taxes, follow those laws as well. There seems to be some tension between this story and that principle. Laura, you're right to point that out. In its earliest mentions, Dina de Malchuta Dina, the law of the land is law. In the Talmud, it's still working itself out, meaning the rabbinic stories and tales and rules about living under the Roman Empire, while there are moments where Dina de Malchuta Dina comes up and gets applied, it's not a overarching category right in the days of the Mishnah like it becomes later by the end of the Talmudic period. So you're sort of seeing some of that transition from we're living in a place where we don't respect the authority that we live under to a time when we do. I want to give a shout out to a teacher of mine, Gil Graff, who wrote I think maybe his dissertation, but he wrote a book on Dina de Malchuta Dina. It's not in wide circulation. I don't know if it's still in print, but if you have a really good Jewish library near you, you might be able to find Gil Graff's book on Dina de Malchuta Dina, and he digs into the detail of the transition from well, how this principle started, what it meant in the early Talmudic period, and how over time it came to mean what it means. But Laura, you are correct. We are seeing some tension here in this story between that principle, which we come to live by, and a time where it seems we didn't always live by it about everything fully. Thanks for asking that. That's a great Talmud.
Also, and Rabbi Goldberg, tell me if you think this makes sense. If some of it is also that these tax collectors are difficult to oversee, and abuse of the tax collection system is rife. So they may be, collecting, they sort of have the power to take money from people, and they're not always necessarily collecting legitimate taxes for the crown.
Yes, although as you say, I agree, that is true.
They're not always in line with the law of the land.
Right, it's true. And then the question becomes in this story, like, is the corruption at the regional level, where it's like someone from the Roman Empire, or is the corruption at the Rabbi Zera's father's level, which is one of our neighbors? But also, even as you say that, Rachel, the way you said it, and I don't mean this is what you meant or meant it this way, there are those in our society when I live in America, when they talk about the government or the IRS, or just, they use exactly your language to talk about the system of taxation in the country in which you and I live in, to say our government is corrupt. It's my money. They take, right? People with a more libertarian or more anti-government stance say what you say about the country we live in. And that attitude is, there is sort of this, I'm independent from the government, they don't have the right to my money. And I don't mean that as like a philosophy, the political argument between bigger government, smaller government. There are those who are rejecting of taxes as a concept, even in our day, and say it the way you said it, just meaning it differently. So there are different perspectives, and some, right? So was there corruption in the Roman Empire? Probably. In its own way.
Definitely.
Definitely, right. Is there, all right, definitely.
Were there people in the Roman Empire? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Okay, yes, that's my modern hedging everything, not to make absolutist comments. Right, definitely, right. Is there corruption today? I'm sure there is too. Is the system as corrupt as the Roman Empire? No, I don't believe that it is. And are there lots of perspectives? Sure. So like there are complications here, but yes, right. And that's some of what I meant. Well, we might justify the rabbis or others who had civil disobedience that was justified because of what how the Romans took taxes, what the system was, and what they did with the money. These texts in small corners of the Jewish community become justification for rejecting government and taxes, and unethical behavior in a time that's very different from what it was then. But it strikes me that the Talmud. Oh, look, someone found Gil Graff's book. It's in the chat. There you go. You have the link. Sorry. I wouldn't want this. I'm raising the flag about using this story to justify unethical behavior towards your civil government today, in a totally different context from where the rabbis was, which most of us don't do, but it's still out there, and I wish it wasn't.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you all for coming, for chatting with us, for participating. Thank you, Rob, for the puns. And we will see you in this space in exactly 1 week's time. Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Take care, everybody.